Welcome back to Novita's new to knitting workshop for absolute beginners. This is the 4th episode of the workshop and my name is Sari.
My name is Markus, and in this episode we will be starting with the ribbing of the hat and covering a very important topic, that's knitting gauge. So please listen and watch carefully. But before we start with the ribbing and the gauge discussion, we'll be joining this one in the round. I was a bit behind you, so this is what it looks like when you've cast on all the stitches for your hat with double pointed needles. I first cast on with just just on one needle, and after that I divided the stitches onto 4 needles. And here's the last cast on stitch, and this is the first stitch I cast on. So what we're doing now is we'll be joining this in the round by simply knitting the first stitch of the first actual row into the first cast on stitch, and there we are. We're starting with the ribbing.
And Markus is working on the double pointed needles, so with them it's really easy to keep track on which round you are on. But for me, because I'm working on the circular needles and just going round and round and round, and there's no really like a breaking point for me, I'm going to add this little yarn loop that I made. This is my stitch marker, and this is going to indicate the beginning of the round. So I'm just going to slide the stitch marker on my needle, and then I'm also ready to start the ribbing. And we are working this on 2x2 ribbing. Yeah.
Which means we're knitting 2 stitches and purling 2 stitches, and repeating that over and over.
Until the
knit
end of
2,
the round.
Purl 2, knit 2, purl 2.
And on the following rounds we are making always the knit stitches above the knit stitches, like here, and then there are columns of purl stitches over here. So that's basically the ribbing.
Yeah. And that's one way to make modifications to your hat. You can make a 2x2 ribbing like we did, or you can make any ribbing you like. Actually, you can make a 1x1 ribbing, or you can make any other variation, because any pattern with knits and purls that form these columns with the same stitches on top of each other will make a rib of some sort.
Yes.
You can, yeah.
Another modification that you can make is to vary the length of the ribbing. As you can see, the pink hat has much longer ribbing than the green one.
And you can fold it over.
Yeah, you can fold it over. So if you don't get tired of the ribbing by the first 5 centimeters, you can continue as long as you want and fold the brim for some extra coziness, like this.
And if my knitting right now looks a bit hard, because I think it does, that's because it is hard. The first row is always the hardest one. It's sort of, you have to keep everything together, and you don't get the same grip as you have later on, and it's hard to see what it's becoming altogether. But don't worry, that's the way it's supposed to be, and that's the way it feels even for experienced knitters. The first row is always the toughest one. So don't give up now. Just make a few more rows, and it will feel
it will get easier.
Definitely.
Yeah, it will get easier as you progress on this project.
And ribbing, of course, is made just to make the hat look like a hat. We're just used to having a ribbing in a hat, but it's also made, of course, for better fit.
Yeah.
Right.
The ribbing usually is a very stretchy stitch pattern, and it's used for cuffs, for hems, for collars, and also from hat brims. So it will fit your head better and snugly.
Great. Okay, but how do you know which size your knitting project will be? I mean, okay, in this pattern we have different sizes, but you can't figure out the exact size by the pattern, of course, can you?
No, you can't. And all of us have a slightly different kind of handwriting when we are knitting. So we already noticed that Markus knits looser than I do. So usually at the beginning of every knitting pattern it says gauge, and you have to check your gauge. It's really important because all the knitting patterns are calculated on that specific gauge. So what does a gauge mean?
Well, gauge means simply how many stitches you need in order to obtain a certain length or width or height of knitting. And it's usually expressed as a number of stitches per 10 centimeters or 4 inches. That's what it's all about. And when you have a knitting pattern, you need to know how many, or you need to keep the same gauge as the pattern has in order to obtain a project that's exactly the size that the pattern says.
Yeah, we made these little swatches for you to show the difference. So I have 3 different swatches. These all are worked on 15 stitches, so the width of the swatches are always 15 stitches, but I worked these on different needle sizes, and you can see the difference in size. So this is what happens when your gauge varies. So if you have a really tight knitting handwriting, your swatch will turn out a lot smaller than for somebody who has a looser writing or knitting style.
So with different needle sizes, you of course obtain different gauge, but there's also the difference between knitters. So I made the same swatches with the same amount of stitches, and let's compare them, right? Okay, this is my smallest, I think. This is my smallest, and here's mine. Put it on top there, and you can see that mine is a good 2 centimeters wider than yours, which means that if I'd start to make a hat which is made for this gauge, and I'd started knitting with this gauge, my hat would be around 8 centimeters.
Too wide.
Too wide,
yeah.
or wider than the pattern, which is a lot in a hat. So that's why you need to check your gauge, and the best way to check your gauge is to make the swatch. We won't be covering it all now in this episode, but we got a great article on that on our New to Knitting website, so please read it before you start, and please make sure to make the swatch. It's a bit boring, but it's well worth it. So,
and it's also a great way to learn the stitch patterns that you are using on the project and familiarize yourself with the yarn and the needles.
Yeah, but what should you do if you realize that your gauge is too tight or too loose, and you only have one set of needles, like with the starter pack?
For this hat project we have provided 3 sizes, so if you are planning to make the largest size, one option is to go down on the size of the hat. So if you have wider gauge, then make a smaller hat.
Yeah. And of course vice versa. So if you have a really tight gauge and you're planning on making the middle one, then you can just easily move up 1 notch and make the bigger one, and you'll probably end up pretty right. Another option is to try to knit tighter, but that's usually not a very good option, because you can start out by trying to make it tighter or looser, but eventually in a while you'll end up with your sort of natural handwriting anyway. So that's not a great idea.
In the starter kit we have 2 different needle sizes. We have the 10mm needles and the 8mm needles. So you can also try knitting the hat with the smaller needles if you think your handwriting is too loose.
Yeah. Okay, that's gauge, and we're well on our way with the ribbing. And in the next episode we'll be getting to the sort of most zen moment of this hat project. That's the so-called stockinette part, the flat part here, which is really nice to do, and that's the topic for the next episode. We'll see you there.
Bye.